I'm thankful, like all other panelists, for this opportunity. I'm still at the point in my life where I'm amazed when I'm offered the opportunity to speak. And I'm very thankful to all you out there for coming and listening. I know I'm going to struggle with time, so I'm going to get right into it. I want to read something here from Thomas Kuhn. He says, in the structure of scientific revolutions, Thomas Kuhn discusses how periods of normal science are interrupted by periods of revolutionary science. Kuhn suggests that during periods of normal science, researchers identify questions to investigate based on existing knowledge. I want to emphasize that point, right? Part of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about economic inequality, about education, these things, but in some ways, I want us just to understand how often we think within the existing paradigm and how that limits our ability to even dream of what might be possible and the kinds of solutions we come up with as a result. The insights gained from these analyses are constrained then by the limits of the prevailing paradigm. Resulting changes tend to mostly comprise tweaks around the margins rather than fundamental reconsiderations. Periods of normal science persist until the current paradigm becomes increasingly less able to solve a growing number of problems, or when external events provoke a clamor for a different vision, a revolution. These themes will play throughout my conversation here today. So the ideal is that education is a path to the American dream. Dr. Hamilton has spoke how it doesn't apply to African Americans at this point in time, that it doesn't have the kind of effect that it's meant to have. In its simplest form, the American dream is the belief that success should be determined by effort, not one starting point in life. Right? And most of us have that as a way of talking to our kids. We believe that effort and ability should lead to desired outcomes. And so that and that's not a bad thing, right? In and of itself. The American dream is about mobility, not security. President Franklin D. Roosevelt told his fellow Democrats in 1936 that liberty requires opportunity to make a living decent according to the standard of time, a living that gives man not only enough to live by, but something to live for. I think that's immensely important also, underlining my conversation, is that it's not just about providing someone with a minimum amount of goods or enough to sustain their life, which I would argue our safety net is designed with that mindset in mind. How much does one need to eat to live through today, right? And that's not enough. We need something more than just the ability to make it to the next day. We need hope. And that's what America is supposed to be about, providing people with opportunity and hope. Our economic system must provide to every American hope, a reason to conform to laws, a reason to participate in social society. We all need some kind of hope, and I think we lack it. Education is meant to play a key role in the dream becoming a reality. While European nations have relied on the direct redistributive role of the welfare state to reconcile citizenship and markets, the United States has chosen to use education as a lever for ensuring equitable outcomes. I think it's very important for my conversation that we also understand the kind of unique position that education plays in America, that it's meant to be an equalizer, right? And so as we judge it in its outcomes, we have to understand as to whether or not just whether or not someone's better off, but has it reduced inequality in society? The reality, education is failing to deliver equally. Low-income children earn less from their degrees as adults. Black adults earn less from their degrees. They have less protection from the degrees. I'm not going to read all the data points, but you'll have them there because I know I'm going to struggle on time. But to me, this is some of the most revealing new research that we have around, because it says that even if I go to school, and Dr. Hamilton, this is some of Dr. Hamilton's research as well, even if I go to school, I participate and I put the effort in and I work hard, I'm not going to be able to achieve the same kinds of outcomes through that effort, right? That fundamentally breaks down everything about the American dream and about our hope in society. This dream is not just a dream, right? It's so important to our ability as a nation to exist and to live in a society that has laws and people want to obey those laws. You have to have some hope that if I apply my effort and ability, that it will lead to similar kinds of outcomes. And as someone who's grown up poor, and as many of you probably have as well, you've seen tangible evidence of either your parents or other people in your neighborhood working, striving, and not achieving. And this can be very damaging to our society. Conflicting visions for how to make the ideal a reality. The conservative vision: the federal government has little or no role to play in financing higher education. President Ronald Reagan: the cost of education is primarily the responsibility of the family. The federal government has a role to play in helping needy students get a chance to receive a college education. This plays out as favoring financing based on merit, even when it comes to student loans. Liberal version: the Higher Education Act of 1965 was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson as part of a plan to create a great society where poverty and racial injustice did not exist. He said, the important role of the federal government is somehow to do something for the people who are down and out, and that's where its major energy in education ought to go. I think it's important for us to understand, particularly in our current climate, though I think it's not unique to this time period, where we have these two very distinct views of the way the world should work. Conflicting ideas about the role of government gave us the current financial aid paradigm, dominated by student loans. I think this is sometimes lost in the discussions around our current financial aid system, is that, I gotta stay by this, we didn't get there, we haven't come to this place out of what was best for people. How do we best create a system that will deliver people out of poverty and provide them with equal opportunity? No, it was a compromise between these two different visions of the world. The National Defense Student Loan Program came out of the debate around whether federal funds should be given to students as scholarships or as loans. Liberal senators concluded conservatives were much more likely to approve a bill if they were made to believe they won a victory by denouncing federal spending on what they thought were socialist scholarships in favor of spending on loans, a financing mechanism that more closely aligned with individual responsibility for paying for college. I was struck by something someone said earlier when they were talking about coming out of after the Civil War, right? And part of the objective was to figure out, now in this new world where we have free slaves, how do we maintain the existing or the past ways, right? And I think of the education, though it might not be as extreme, in a similar kind of way. Part of what was going on was not how do we improve the lives of people, but how do we maintain the current situation in some ways, right? And I think it's very important to understand. So compromise doesn't always bring the best results, particularly when our ideologies, whether Democrat or liberal, trump the idea that our goal should be what will be best to deliver the people and give them a better situation in life. Our focus has to be singularly on how do we create better outcomes for people, not on our ideology. They should come way beneath that. And that was not the case here. And I'm not going to read through this because I'm still struggling with this time thing. What struck me about this is that the student loan program that we have today, and largely the financial aid paradigm we have today, wasn't based on evidence, right? I want you to understand that. It is not as though they had great amount of evidence to do this. No, it was simply that, hey, one group wants to give them grants to pay for college, make college kind of free. The other group doesn't like that idea. And so what can we do that will allow us to do something? And we said student loans is the thing we're going to do. The current paradigm, so what normal science in America financial aid policy looks like. The current paradigm suggests how people pay for college doesn't matter. It only matters if they have the money to pay for it. So I want to distinguish on this slide is that the basic question that has guided education and research is someone who goes to college better off than if they had not, right? In that scenario, and the way it's come out is that basically has come to mean whether or not someone can finance education or not, right? It doesn't focus on how they finance it and whether that matters. It doesn't address equity either. So the main question becomes I went to college, am I somehow better off than someone who didn't go to college? That becomes the comparison. And that's a good comparison because it says education matters on some level, but it's not the whole story. It's certainly not the whole story in a society in which we rely on education to deliver equal outcomes. So I think we need to go a little bit farther in examining whether or not education is living up to its standard and matters. I'm going to hit this quickly as well. I want to highlight some things, particularly around the student debt program. When I mentioned Thomas Kuhn in the early part, so a lot of our policies become tweaks because we're stuck in this current paradigm of this is what the world can do. We look at our politicians, we see gridlock up in D.C., and we think, what can we get past, right? The objective is not as what could make a change, what could make a difference, but what can we get past, right? And in that context, we're stuck thinking about creating solutions that maintain the existing program. So we think of things like forbearance and deferment and income-based repayment plans, all things that help maintain the current structure, but not thinking about the implications of that. And so what we've seen in the data is that among African Americans in particular, a lot of them are in more debt 9 years after they got out of college than they were when they first got out, right? So their debt is actually increasing over time. 9 years after leaving school, the 2005 cohort has paid down only 38% of its original student debt. Under a standard 10-year amortization schedule, these loans would be approaching full repayment, and only about 10% of the original balance would remain. For 4 years after earning a bachelor's degree, black graduates in 2008 cohort held 24,720 more student loan debt than white graduates. Right? So this is immensely important as we begin to create programs and we debate things like income-based repayment plans, is that we're actually extending the period of time in which these students are in debt, right? And during that period of time, that debt's actually growing over time. So, which brings me to this point. When I was talking about equity, my question that I ask is not whether or not a student who goes to college is better off, though I think that is an important question, than those who don't go to college. But it is whether or not a student who goes to college and has debt can do as well as a student who goes to college with no debt, right? Because if the model is that education is to be the equalizer, that has to be the standard by which we measure whether or not it's being successful or not. And without going into all the data, there's a number of studies that now are beginning to ask this question and think about this in this way, and we're finding out that these students don't accumulate wealth as fast. They don't marry. They don't have babies as quickly. 5 minutes, I'm going to make it happen. And so we're finding out all these negative things, and that's what makes it so important, even when we start thinking about these solutions we're creating within the current paradigm around things like income-based repayment or pay it forward. We're just extending the period of time in which they're not building assets for the future, right? When they're not accumulating the wealth they need to really equalize outcomes and strengthen the return on a degree. To me, this is immensely important to think about. Here, there's some data showing that how it's actually creating this cycle in which minorities, blacks particularly, are more likely to have more debt, which means they're more likely to end up having less wealth, which means their kids, and wealth is important for whether or not they go to college. So we get this cycle going, and our financial aid system is helping to breed and build this. And so if we want our financial aid system, and if we want education to actually be the equalizer we want it to be, we have to think about new ways of financing that actually builds the initial wealth of families so that they can achieve equal outcomes. I'm going to skip over this one for the sake of time. On this slide, there's a number of studies that are beginning to show that for $1 that you spend, it doesn't give the same amount if you're black than if you're white. So with Thomas Shapiro's work, he talks about find a dollar increase in income later translates to a $5 increase in wealth for whites, but only 70-cent increase for blacks. Now, moving down, Shapiro finds that when blacks start off with asset levels similar to whites, they have a return of $4.03. Two things should be striking about that. One is important to note that assets, initial assets, really matter even to our ability to have equal returns on our income. So it's not just a matter of having jobs and earning wages. You also need to have a certain level of assets in order for that money to pay off in ways, equal kinds of ways. Now, what should be evident from that as well, even once we include assets, there's still, that doesn't account for all of it. It makes a big difference. It goes from 70 cents to $4, right, for every dollar, but not quite enough. So getting to my solution, I don't have to spend too much time on it because Dr. Hamilton already mentioned it in some senses with baby bonds. Children's savings accounts are a way of thinking about baby bonds as well. Typically with children's savings accounts, you can put a one-to-one match. So for every dollar a person saves, they get an additional dollar. And a lot of times these programs come with initial deposits. And so like in Maine, every kid born gets $500 put into their account. They get a dollar match up to a certain amount per year, right? So it's basic model of the programs. I would call these small dollar CSAs because $500 relative to what one needs to pay for college is relatively small. However, the evidence shows that even with these small dollar accounts, there's a whole lot of benefits that can be derived for them, right? So just having an account, even though there's not a lot of money going into the account, even with randomized controlled trials, show that it can improve things like social emotional development and parent expectations and so forth and so on. As you see here, I am speeding myself up here. But one of the things about these small dollar accounts is what we know about low income people is they have little amount of money to save in the first place, little amount of discretionary income. And so while savings is important, they can get all these other benefits from it, we can't ignore the fact that they don't have a lot of money to save. And so we have to address that. One of my concerns kind of is with the CSA movement, and maybe Dr. Hamilton shares the same concern, is particularly with the small dollar version of it, is that it can be seen as a replacement for other financial aid, but yet not provide enough resources in the end to deliver on creating equal outcomes. That's like no time? Is that 1 minute? Okay. 1 minute, I can make it happen. So we do need to address that issue, and that's where I think the baby bonds part comes in having a large initial deposit into these accounts, right? A much more substantial deposit. If we understand, A, the return on a degree is weakened through our current financial aid system of relying on debt, this solution is to provide them with a financial aid model that builds wealth, because we understand that initial assets are important to whether or not their job really pays off for them in the end. How much income they get is only part. I'm a perfect example of that in my life, right? At this point, I make a good amount of money, but I grew up without money, and so I don't have a lot of assets accumulated right now, right? And it's really important that in order for that degree to pay off, is that we have some large investment in initial assets. And so CSAs provide some way of doing that. Let me skip, and then I'll get to, and some people might scoff against kind of this idea of a wealth transfer. One of the challenges I think we have is to connect this idea to existing value systems, right? Nobody can really accept these views unless they figure out how it fits into their value system. Currently, in America, with a wealth transfer sounds almost foreign to us because it's like antithetic to effort and ability leads to desired outcomes. We're just going to give it to these people, and so therefore they won't have worked for it, they won't have earned it, and so it becomes a non-starter from the very beginning. We have to have people understand that the amount of, it's about making the American dream real in the first place, making it a reality. We have to be able to have them understand how providing people, low-income families and minority families, with an asset and investment is not a gift, but it's a way of making sure that they can, through their effort and ability, actually achieve the American dream and the outcomes that other people can achieve. That's a rushed version of that, but I'm sure we have time in questions and answers to talk more about it.